The filming of The Passion of the Christ became one of the most unusual productions in modern cinema. Director Mel Gibson set out to portray the final hours of Jesus with a level of realism rarely attempted in Hollywood. But as filming began, a series of unexpected events started unfolding on Gibson's set. Jim Caviezel, the actor chosen to portray Jesus, suffered real injuries during production, from a brutal accidental whip strike to a shocking lightning incident while filming. Crew members reported strange technical failures, while some actors described emotional experiences they could hardly explain. Were these simply the challenges of a demanding historical film, or was something deeper surrounding Mel Gibson's project? If you enjoy exploring powerful stories of faith and mystery, like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we uncover what happened during the filming of The Passion of the Christ. Before any of the strange events happened on set, the story really began with one man's decision. Mel Gibson did not set out to make a typical Hollywood film. His goal was something far more unusual. He wanted to show the final hours of Jesus Christ with a level of realism that many filmmakers had avoided for decades. Most religious films before this had softened the story, focusing on inspirational moments rather than the raw suffering described in the biblical accounts. Gibson believed that approach left out the true weight of the story. Instead, he wanted viewers to feel the intensity of those final hours. Think about that for a moment. If you were a filmmaker in Hollywood, would you risk everything on a project like this? Major studios certainly would not. When Gibson first presented the idea, many executives quickly rejected it. They believed a film spoken entirely in ancient languages would never attract a large audience. Gibson insisted on using Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew because he believed the original languages would bring viewers closer to the historical reality of the events. To studio executives, that decision sounded like a financial disaster waiting to happen. But Gibson did not change his plan. Rather than compromise the project, he made an even more surprising decision. He would finance the film himself. Around $30 million of his own money went into the production. That meant if the film failed, the loss would fall entirely on him. Now imagine the pressure that created on the set. From the beginning, Gibson made it clear to the cast and crew that this project would not be easy. The story they were telling was emotionally heavy, physically demanding, and historically complex. Historical advisors and theologians were brought in to guide the production, helping ensure that costumes, environments, and dialogue reflected the world of the first century as accurately as possible. The filming locations were carefully chosen to resemble ancient Jerusalem. Stone streets, traditional clothing, and natural landscapes were used to create an atmosphere that felt authentic rather than staged. Many actors later said that once they stepped onto the set, it no longer felt like a movie production. It felt like stepping into another time. But authenticity came with challenges. Weather conditions were often harsh. Outdoor scenes meant working through cold winds, rain, and long nights. Gibson frequently asked for multiple takes in order to capture the emotional intensity he wanted. For the actors, especially those portraying the most dramatic moments, the experience could be exhausting. Yet something interesting happened as filming continued. Instead of discouraging the cast, the difficulty seemed to strengthen their commitment. Many members of the crew began to feel that they were participating in something more meaningful than a typical film project. They were not simply recreating a story. They were attempting to portray one of the most influential moments in human history. And that atmosphere on Mel Gibson's set would soon be followed by events that no one involved in the production expected. Because as filming continued, unusual things began to happen. As filming moved deeper into the most intense scenes of the story, Mel Gibson knew the production would become physically demanding. The final hours of Jesus, described in the Gospels, are not gentle or symbolic. They are brutal, painful, and emotionally overwhelming. Gibson was determined to portray that reality without softening it. And that decision quickly turned the set into one of the most physically challenging environments many actors had ever experienced. Jim Caviezel, the actor chosen by Mel Gibson to portray Jesus, understood from the beginning that the role would not be easy. In fact, Gibson reportedly warned him before filming even began that accepting the role could affect his career. But Caviezel still agreed. He believed the story was important enough to take the risk. What no one expected was how real the suffering during filming would become. One of the first major incidents happened during the crucifixion scenes. Caviezel was required to carry a heavy wooden cross across rough terrain. This was not a lightweight prop designed for convenience. Gibson wanted the object to feel authentic. During one take, Caviezel stumbled and fell under the weight of the cross. When he hit the ground, his shoulder was dislocated. The cry of pain captured in that moment was not acting. The injury was real. Despite the pain, Caviezel returned to filming after receiving medical attention. The production schedule was tight, and the scenes still needed to be completed. But this was only the beginning. Another shocking moment occurred during the filming of the scourging scene. If you have seen the film, you know how intense that sequence is. Multiple takes were required to capture the choreography of the whips. During one take, a whip accidentally struck Caviezel directly. The impact left a deep cut across his back. That scar would remain permanently. Now imagine standing on that set, watching those scenes unfold. The story already carries emotional weight, but seeing real injuries happening in front of the cameras made the experience even more intense for the cast and crew. Then came the incident that many people still talk about today. While filming outdoors, a sudden storm moved across the area. Lightning began striking in the distance as the crew prepared for another scene. During the production, a bolt of lightning struck very close to the filming location. Reports later suggested that Caviezel himself was indirectly struck during the incident. The moment shocked everyone present. Filming stopped immediately as the crew tried to understand what had just happened. For some, it felt like an extremely dangerous accident. For others, the moment carried a strange symbolism that was difficult to ignore. Think about that for a second. An actor portraying Jesus, standing under a dark sky, in the middle of filming one of the most famous stories in history, when lightning suddenly strikes near the set. Coincidence? Maybe. But that was not the only unusual event people would remember from Mel Gibson's production. As filming continued, the physical injuries were not the only challenges that appeared during the production. Crew members working on Mel Gibson's set soon began noticing something else. Certain technical problems seemed to appear at the most unexpected moments. Now, technical issues are not unusual during film production. Cameras malfunction, lights fail, and equipment occasionally stops working. That is simply part of filmmaking. But according to several members of the crew, some of the problems during the Passion of the Christ seemed difficult to explain. One of the most talked about situations involved the lighting equipment. During the preparation for a major scene, the main lighting system suddenly shut down just moments before filming was scheduled to begin. Electricians immediately began checking the cables and circuits. Everything appeared to be in perfect condition. No wires were damaged. No power source had failed. Yet the lights refused to work. The crew spent a long time inspecting the system, trying to locate the problem. But strangely, no clear explanation was ever found. Eventually, the lights returned to normal, and filming continued as planned. Now imagine being on that set. Hundreds of people waiting, cameras ready, actors prepared for an emotional scene, and suddenly, The entire lighting system stops working without a visible cause. What would you think in that moment? For some members of the crew, it felt like nothing more than a technical delay. But for others, it added to the strange atmosphere that many had already begun to notice during production. And that was not the only incident. Camera equipment also experienced unexpected interruptions during certain scenes. Operators sometimes reported that the cameras would briefly stop responding, forcing the team to pause filming and reset the system. Again, these issues did not appear to have a clear technical explanation. Then there were the weather changes. Several outdoor scenes were filmed in areas where the weather had been calm throughout the morning. But on more than one occasion, strong winds suddenly swept through the production area just as filming was about to begin. Tents moved, equipment shifted, and crew members had to secure their gear before continuing. These sudden changes made the filming process even more complicated. But perhaps the most unusual moments came late at night. Some technicians who remained on set after filming hours reported hearing unexplained sounds around the equipment area. Footsteps, movement, or small noises that seemed to come from empty parts of the location. When they checked the area, nothing was there. Of course, film sets can be large and confusing places, especially in the dark. Most people dismissed these stories as imagination or fatigue after long working hours. Still, the stories spread quietly among the crew. And the more these incidents happened, the more people began to feel that the production environment was unlike anything they had experienced before. But the technical problems and strange sounds were only part of the story, because soon some of the actors themselves would begin describing experiences that were even harder to explain. Many of them later said that working on Mel Gibson's film affected them in ways they had not expected. Portraying a historical character is one thing. Portraying figures from one of the most influential stories in human history is something very different. Several actors began to feel the emotional weight of the story long before the cameras stopped rolling. Maya Morgenstern, the actress who played Mary, described some of the crucifixion scenes as deeply overwhelming. During the moments when her character watches Jesus suffer, the intensity of the situation affected her far beyond normal acting. She later explained that the emotions she experienced during those scenes felt unusually powerful. After filming certain sequences, she needed time alone to recover emotionally. Now imagine standing in her position. The environment around you looks like ancient Jerusalem. The actors are dressed in historical clothing. The story being performed represents one of the most significant moments in Christian belief. Under those conditions, it becomes easier to understand why some actors said the experience felt more real than a typical film set. Another actor who spoke about unusual experiences was Claudia Girini, who portrayed the wife of Pontius Pilate. During the production, she reported having recurring dreams connected to the story being filmed. According to her, these dreams showed moments from the life of Jesus that were not even part of the script. The images were vivid enough that they stayed in her mind long after she woke up. At the time, she did not openly share these experiences with the rest of the crew. But later, she explained that the dreams caused her to think more deeply about her own beliefs and spiritual questions. And she was not the only one affected. Some extras who participated in the crucifixion scenes described the atmosphere during filming as unusually heavy and quiet. Large crowds were required for certain scenes, yet many people said the environment often became silent once the cameras started recording. No one had instructed them to remain silent, but many did so instinctively. Think about that for a moment. Hundreds of people gathered on a film set, yet the mood becomes unexpectedly calm as the scene unfolds. For some participants, the moment felt less like acting and more like witnessing a powerful historical event being recreated in front of them. A few extras even claimed that, during the filming of one crowd scene, they briefly noticed a figure moving through the group who did not appear to belong to the cast or crew. The person was described as wearing light-colored robes and walking quietly through the crowd. When filming ended and people tried to locate the individual, no one could confirm who it was. Of course, large productions often involve many people moving around the set, so it is possible that the figure simply went unnoticed earlier. Still, stories like this continued circulating among the crew. And as filming moved toward its most dramatic scenes, the number of unusual stories from the set continued to grow. By this point, the cast and crew had already experienced injuries, technical problems, and powerful emotional moments. But several people involved in the production later described additional events that they found difficult to explain. One of the most talked about situations happened during the filming of a crucifixion sequence. The weather earlier that day had been relatively calm. The crew had prepared the cameras, lighting, and sound equipment, and everything appeared ready for the next take. But shortly before filming began, a sudden fog began to form across the area. At first, it looked like a thin mist, something that might disappear quickly. Instead, the fog became thick enough to partially cover parts of the set. For a short period, visibility dropped, and the crew had to pause while waiting for the fog to clear. Eventually, it faded just as quickly as it had appeared, allowing the filming to continue. Weather changes can certainly happen outdoors, especially in mountainous areas. Still, several crew members later mentioned how unusual the timing felt, arriving almost exactly when one of the most symbolic scenes was about to begin. Another strange moment involved the wildlife around the filming location. During one take of the crucifixion scene, some members of the crew noticed birds circling above the set. This might not seem unusual at first, but according to people present that day, the birds remained above the location for an extended period, flying in slow circles as the cameras continued recording. Some observers later said the sight created an eerie atmosphere while the scene was unfolding. Then there were the unexplained sounds. Late at night, when most of the crew had already left the filming location, a few technicians remained behind to prepare equipment for the following day. Several of them later recalled hearing movements around parts of the set that should have been empty. Footsteps, small sounds of objects shifting. When they checked the areas, nothing appeared out of place. Of course, after long working hours, tired minds can sometimes misinterpret ordinary noises. Film sets also contain many structures, cables, and equipment that can move slightly with changes in temperature or wind. Most people accepted that explanation. But one more moment continued to stand out for those who witnessed it. During a review of footage from one of the scenes, a camera operator noticed a brief flash of light that did not match the lighting setup used during filming. The crew reviewed the equipment and the angles of the lights, trying to understand where the reflection might have come from. No clear source was identified. Was it simply a technical reflection that no one noticed during filming? Possibly. Yet stories like these slowly became part of the larger conversation surrounding Mel Gibson's production. Individually, each incident might have seemed small, but together, they created the feeling that the filming environment carried a strange and powerful atmosphere. When filming finally came to an end, many members of Mel Gibson's cast and crew felt they had been part of an experience unlike any other production. Months of physically demanding scenes, strange incidents, and emotional intensity had left a lasting impression on those who were there. But what happened next would bring an entirely different kind of challenge. The moment The Passion of the Christ was released to the public, the film immediately became one of the most talked-about movies in the world. Audiences were not simply watching another historical drama. They were witnessing a film that portrayed the final hours of Jesus with a level of detail and brutality that many had never seen before on screen. Some viewers described the experience as deeply moving and spiritually powerful. Others found the scenes extremely difficult to watch. Almost overnight, discussions about the film spread across media outlets, churches, and cultural institutions. And the reactions were far from unanimous. Some religious leaders praised Mel Gibson for presenting the suffering of Jesus with honesty and intensity. They believed the film forced viewers to confront the meaning of sacrifice in a way that few modern films had attempted. For these supporters, the emotional impact of the movie was exactly what made it important. But not everyone agreed. Other critics argued that the graphic violence in the film might overwhelm audiences and distract from the spiritual message. Debates also emerged about how certain historical elements were portrayed. Inside some religious communities, discussions began about whether the film's interpretation could lead to misunderstandings of biblical events. Now think about that moment in time. A film spoken almost entirely in ancient languages, financed personally by its director, rejected by major studios. Yet suddenly, it was being discussed across the entire world. Despite the controversy, audiences continued filling theaters. People who rarely watched religious films became curious about the project. News reports about the unusual events during filming only increased that curiosity. Before long, the film's financial success became impossible to ignore. Produced with a budget of about $30 million, The Passion of the Christ went on to earn more than $600 million globally. That made it one of the most successful religious films ever released. For Mel Gibson, the gamble he had taken by financing the film himself had turned into an extraordinary result. But the impact of the movie extended beyond ticket sales. In many places, churches organized group screenings to encourage reflection and discussion. Some communities used the film as a starting point for conversations about faith, suffering, and forgiveness. Even people who did not share the same religious beliefs often found themselves discussing the themes presented in the film. At the same time, the personal cost of the project became visible for some of the people involved. Jim Caviezel, whose performance as Jesus had been praised by many viewers, later explained that his career in Hollywood changed after the film. While he remained proud of the role, he acknowledged that the decision to participate in such an intense project had long-term consequences. And yet, despite the debates, the controversies, and the questions raised by critics, one thing was clear. Mel Gibson's film had achieved something very rare. It had captured the attention of the world. But even as audiences continued discussing the movie, many people remained fascinated by something else entirely. The strange events that had taken place during the filming were still being talked about years later. And that raised one final question. What did Mel Gibson himself think about everything that happened during the making of the film? Years after the cameras stopped rolling, the story of the Passion of the Christ continued to spark curiosity. For many people, the film was memorable not only because of what appeared on screen, but also because of what reportedly happened behind the scenes during its production. Mel Gibson himself has spoken about the project many times, and he has often described the experience as one of the most intense periods of his life as a filmmaker. From the beginning, he knew the film would be controversial. Choosing to focus almost entirely on the suffering of Jesus was not a typical decision for a Hollywood production. Gibson believed that the emotional power of the story depended on showing the reality of those final hours, rather than presenting a softened version of the events. But even he could not have predicted everything that would happen during filming. The injuries suffered by Jim Caviezel, the unexpected storms, the lightning incident, and the unusual technical problems became stories that followed the film long after it left theaters. Over time, these accounts have been repeated in interviews, documentaries, and discussions among fans of the movie. For some people, these events were simply the result of filming a physically demanding production in difficult conditions. Large movie sets often involve complex equipment, unpredictable weather, and long working hours. Under those circumstances, accidents and technical problems can happen. But for others, the events felt too symbolic to ignore. They pointed to the strange timing of certain moments, the emotional reactions experienced by many of the actors, and the mysterious stories shared by members of the crew. Whether those moments were coincidences or something more meaningful depends largely on how each person chooses to interpret them. Mel Gibson has generally approached the subject with a sense of reflection rather than certainty. In interviews, he has emphasized that his primary goal was to tell the story of Jesus in a way that would make audiences think deeply about sacrifice and faith. And in many ways, the film succeeded in doing exactly that. Even years after its release, the Passion of the Christ continues to be discussed in conversations about faith, cinema, and storytelling. It remains one of the most successful religious films ever made, and its influence can still be seen in later films that explore spiritual themes with greater seriousness. At the same time, the mysterious stories from the set have become part of the film's legacy. People still ask questions. Were the unusual events during filming simply coincidences? Were they the natural result of an intense production environment? Or did the powerful story being portrayed create an atmosphere that affected everyone involved? The truth may never be fully known, but one thing is certain. The filming of The Passion of the Christ left a deep impression on the people who experienced it, and the stories from that production continue to capture the imagination of audiences around the world. And now, we would love to hear from you. What do you think about the events that happened during the filming of this movie? Do you believe they were just coincidences? Or could there have been something deeper behind them? If you enjoyed this video and want to explore more fascinating stories like this, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next discoveries. Thank you for watching, and we truly appreciate you being part of this community.
Digging through archives and historical accounts to bring you this story was a profound journey. Whether you view the events on Mel Gibson set as mere coincidence or something far deeper, there's no denying the raw intensity of these productions. It reminds us that sometimes the struggle behind the camera is as powerful as the story on screen. I've meticulously pieced together these accounts to offer an authentic look into that mysterious atmosphere. Now, I want to hear from you. Was it fate or just a demanding set? If you appreciate this deep dive research, please like, subscribe, and join our community. Your support allows us to continue uncovering these incredible stories together.